Therefore, confess your sins to one another, and pray for one another, that you may be healed. The prayer of a righteous person has great power as it is working. Throughout most initial players' playthroughs of Silent Hill 2, many things become apparent. Hidden meanings, mentally ill characters, and religious symbolism. The verse I read at the start was James 5:16. A verse about confessing your sins to become healed, an idea which might sound familiar to those who have played the game. It's things like this that make me ask questions about the game's writing. Is it mere coincidence that a verse of such similarity to a vital part of the story would share the same name as a character you play? I mean, these are the people who made Silent Hill 1. A game filled with so much religious symbolism that it would take much longer to comb through than this one. It is likely a video for another day. Point is that the series is no stranger to biblical texts and religious symbolism. And the point of this video is to give a thorough analysis of these showcases of symbolism and maybe add more subtext to the subtlety of Silent Hill 2. Before we begin, I'd be way more lost if not for all the people on the Silent Hill Heaven forum who've listed some of these details. Some of these I haven't even found myself yet in my admittedly meager amount of playthroughs. So credits will be listed in the description. I'd like to thank as well the writers for the wiki for creating a helpful place to find some of the information I needed to write this video. And lastly, I'd like to thank Damien, the great writer here on the channel who helped clean up my messy script. Another disclaimer before I begin is that the sources listed come to different conclusions than I do, so take what I say subjectively. This is an analysis, and thus is not fact. I encourage different interpretations if you have any, in fact, as it makes discussions around Silent Hill 2 more interesting and engaging. For the uninitiated who have not played Silent Hill 2, I will do a quick plot summary. Spoilers and all for the game. If you are interested in what I'm talking about, I do recommend actually playing the game, but I figure that most people watching this video have already played the game. But just in case you haven't, James is a widowed husband who's come to Silent Hill upon receiving a letter from his wife, who's been dead for 3 years, succumbing to an incurable disease. Throughout the story, we hear that she's actually been alive up until at least a month ago. As the game progresses, we get to unravel what really happened to Mary. We get to find that James, the playable character, only maybe a week ago, had killed his wife. Burdened by her disease, he wanted to move on. But after the murder, he turned to delusion, forgetting what he did, believing she had died 3 years ago after she had gotten her diagnosis. And now he believes that she has written him a letter to come to this town.
I got a letter. The name on the envelope said, Mary. My wife's name. It's ridiculous. Couldn't possibly be true. That's what I keep telling myself. A dead person can't write a letter. Mary died of that damn disease 3 years ago.
Thy hands fashioned and made me, and now thou dost turn about and destroy me. This quote is the first of 2 found written on the wall of the truck stop bathroom during the opening of the game. The writing is ambiently smudged and hard to read, but still, most of it is still recoverable. This writing is, of course, the Bible verse, Job 10:8, found in the book of Job. The book of Job is thematically charged by its themes of suffering and theodicy, which is a thought process meant to vindicate God. The verse itself is contextually about Job's faith in God, which is constantly tested. His suffering is not a product of his own doing, and is happening to him non-consensually, leading to Job having existential crises throughout his story. This verse could be used to symbolize James and his delusions of Maria, a creation of his mind, a thing made by his hands, even if unknown to him and killed by both his creations and himself. Keep this verse in mind, as it does tie into another verse found within the bathroom. The other verse can be found written on the opposite wall, reading, "I am decaying like a rotten thing, like a garment that is moth-eaten." This verse, found in Job 13:28, could likely symbolize Mary and the disease that eats away at her and reflects how she feels while bedridden. One thing I found interesting to point out is how these verses represent both Mary and Maria being found on opposite walls, on the opposite side of James, writing-wise. One last thing to do with the verses is the similarity between the characters of Mary and Job. Regarding the unfairness of their situations, for Job, God took everything from him to test his faith because of a bet with the devil. Losing his property, his health, and his children. His life was out of control, essentially being shown the worst of human despair. For Mary, she became sick with an incurable disease at an early age and died at the hands of her husband, who simply did it to have his own life and leave her and the sickness she had behind him. Both characters were done wrong by the others they thought so highly of. For Job, it was the God he served, and for Mary, the man she loved. Moving on, found inside the bathroom is a drawing with a figure of the she-demon Lilith, which can be found surrounded by a variety of the names of God written in Hebrew. And as far as I can interpret, this holds no meaning and was added for looks. What makes this particular figure interesting to me, though, is that it is borderline impossible to find in any book or image besides Silent Hill 2 and The Kabbalah by Gershom Scholem. It may be more accessible in Japanese, or I may have been looking in the wrong places, but I couldn't even find the scroll that this is from. And trust me, I've looked. I've searched through the sources found in the book. I found the photographer's name. I looked him up. Found almost nothing on him. His website has been gone for years and has no archives. This is in none of the books he's credited in that are found on the Internet Archive. This picture just cannot be found for some reason. If anyone finds another source of this image, please tell me about it in the comments. I want to now talk about Angela, but before we do, it is important we talk about her tragic story. If you are watching this, you probably already know who this is, so I will keep this concise. Angela is a victim of childhood sexual and physical abuse by her father and her brother, with a mother who turns the other way, blaming Angela for what happens, eventually even leaving her with her abusive father and brother. Such behavior influenced by this trauma can be seen in how she acts. Angela's behavior is characteristically childlike despite being 19. This is a trait found in most childhood sexual and physical abuse victims. Her apologetic behavior for even the smallest of things, even if they're not her fault, is also apparent and indicative of the trauma put upon her. After years of abuse, she finally snaps and kills her father, as reported in the blood-soaked newspaper found right before the abstract daddy fight. She then later on murders her brother as well, according to the Silent Hill 2 novel. When we eventually do meet her, in the cemetery of Silent Hill, she says she is looking for her mother, who she believes to be here, implicating that she's there to try and end her life as well. Now that her story is covered, we can try and cover the symbolism. Right before you find her in the apartments, you come to a set of doors. One black, boarded up, and nailed shut. One white, clean and open with no obstructions. I believe this is symbolizing heaven and hell, or her sins and her innocence, which are often associated with colors. The fact that the black door is boarded up is really symbolic of how repressed her actions and what she's gone through is. Being boarded up and shut, much like her past. The white door is more indicative of the innocent, safe behavior she exhibits normally. After James has helped Angela defeat Abstract Daddy, the manifestation of what has happened to her in her past, we find Angela in the infamous fire scene. Aside from the somber beauty of the scene already, the scene may also symbolize her unwillingness to acknowledge her sins of murder, or even to stop them. She believes we are her mother. She tries calling for us, saying we're the only one left. The only one left to kill. Once she finally realizes that we are not her mom, and that she may not be able to find her mom, it becomes apparent immediately what her next move is. She asks James for a knife she let him hold earlier after she was experiencing suicidal tendencies in the hotel scene. James refuses to give it to her, but it doesn't matter. She turns around and walks away, and the purgatory which she was in comes to a close as she walks towards the flames of hell, engulfed by them. Angela is a sickeningly tragic character, essentially defined by experiences that were out of her control, and made into a murderer by the people she called family. A tormented little girl turned into a monster. And moving on to the hospital, we see Maria start coughing, and she lays down to rest, and we go on our own. After which, we are transported to the Otherworld section. In this Otherworld section, we can find hospital rooms devoid of enemies, covered in white cloth, which I believe is using a symbol for white used in the Bible, which is purity and cleanliness. The rooms clean from monsters, from the twisted delusions of James' mind, clean from the horrors we've become used to seeing. White cloth and garments in the Bible usually also can symbolize being covered by God's righteousness and being saved by Him. Take that as you will. While attempting to leave the hospital after finally meeting back up with Maria, the player is chased by Pyramid Head. After a desperate flee, we get to an elevator and see the doors start to close on Maria. And James struggles to force it open for her before Pyramid Head catches up. But unfortunately he is unable to, and is forced to watch as Pyramid Head lunges his great blade into her. James falls to the floor as a somber piece begins to play. The track is called Magdalene. named after the saint Mary Magdalene. The name is not randomly chosen, though, as the story of Mary Magdalene, who I will just call Magdalene from now on, mirrors both Mary and Maria. Both Mary and Magdalene have an alternate image of them that depicts them as a sex worker. Mary has her twisted other self with Maria, a stripper made by James's inner mind in a response to being sexually frustrated during her sickness. And Magdalene has a similar one as well. In around 1591, Pope Gregory I declared the identity of a prostitute found in Luke 7:36 through 7:50 to be Mary Magdalene, even though this was not true. She was made into a sexual form she never was. Magdalene was portrayed this way by the church for over 1,000 years. I think the track kind of reflects this in a way as it plays. It's so somberly played and invokes an almost ugly feeling out of the person listening to it. The piano just hauntingly drones on without end, and feels as though you're not supposed to feel just sadness over her death, but hopelessness. It's so ambient sounding. And even on the soundtrack, it just cuts off at the end without proper finish, likely reflecting the fate of the character. Mary Magdalene is also the first to discover that Jesus has been resurrected, which could be a hint to Maria's multiple resurrections that would come throughout the rest of the game. And finally, on a smaller note, the name Mary, when translated to Japanese, reads as Maria, also helping the connection between the three characters. At the Silent Hill Society, players can find the spiral writing key, which we can use to get to Toluca Prison. The description reads, "'Tis doubt which leadeth to purgatory." Purgatory is a concept used to decide the fate of the tested. They redeem themselves and go to heaven, or keep into their sin and go into eternal damnation for their sin, in a similar way to the test put on James by the town. He is either deemed forgiven and goes on with his life, or isn't, or he's not forgiven, and he is punished. During the Toluca Prison section, the player finds a cell, which once James goes into, locks behind him. A literal cell for James, for the crimes he's committed. Eventually, if you do try to leave enough, you can't get out. What I care about in this scene is what is inside the cell. Inside it, we can find multiple depictions of Jesus littering the cell, most depicting him and the cross in some way. The most defining depiction being Jesus carrying the cross. As to why this could be in James' cell could be that it has a connection to his themes as a character. This specific depiction of Jesus is often used to symbolize redemption. Jesus carries his cross to redeem humanity for the sins they have committed. James carries his metaphorical cross to redeem himself for the sins he's committed. It's quite literally his cross to bear. Another meaning it could be is the carrying of a burden. Jesus carries the cross and the sins of all of humanity, and James carries the inner guilt for the murder of his wife, which he held so much of that his mind would create Pyramid Head to punish him for it. A burden so heavy that he erased it from his mind. And just like Jesus in a sort of metaphorical way, he is reborn when he leaves the burden behind before the Pyramid Head fight, when he declares,
I was weak. That's why I needed you. Needed someone to punish me for my sins. But that's all over now.
He is rebirthed free from his burdens, which is supported by what we find in the hands of the two Pyramid Heads after the player finally defeats them. Each one grasps an Easter egg. the eggs used to celebrate the rebirth of Christ on the third day. After we are reborn through this fight, the player finally faces Mary or Maria. Her appearance is almost nun-like. I think this may represent two things. It could represent devotion, as Mary devoted her whole life to James and loved him and was loyal throughout her life. Or it could have represented her innocence, which she had in his eyes, being murdered while she struggled to live. This finally leads us to the endings of the game, which I think are most interesting. Therefore confess your sins to one another, and pray for one another, that you may be healed. The prayer of a righteous person has great power as it is working. Bringing this verse I quoted from the beginning back is a good way to look at the endings of this game and to view his fates. In each ending, we get to see the way he confesses his sins to Mary, or whether he denies them. In the worst ending of the bunch, the Maria ending, James refuses to confess his sins, and only begrudgingly says anything about them when it's forced out of him. We can also see him take Maria, the twisted, fake, idolized version of his wife, with him. But as they begin to leave, we can see Mary start to cough. She is getting sick just like Mary did.
You'd better do something about that cough.
And James is forced into a loop of personal hell of seeing his wife die over and over. In the neutral ending, the in-water ending, he admits his sins to Mary, but can't fully accept the responsibility, saying,
The truth is, part of me hated you.
Saying only part of him wanted to do it. To shift the blame to part of him that we aren't seeing, that isn't him anymore. Not fully telling her the truth. In this ending, he can't live without her, and takes her body and drives himself into the lake, killing himself to be with her. And in the best ending, the leave ending, he fully admits to his sins, saying,
The truth is, I hated you. I wanted you out of the way. I wanted my life back.
He admits his sin to her with no lies, and so he's granted what he wanted in the beginning when he committed his sin. He gets to go on with his life, and we can see him take Laura, the child Mary wanted to adopt, and leave Silent Hill. He does just what is told in the appropriately titled James 5:16, confessing truly in being healed. His guilt gone, his burden gone, and he is forgiven of his sins. Throughout the duration of this game, players can be exposed to genuinely wonderful work done by Team Silent through their use of biblical texts and ideas to enhance the world they created and the characters within it. And the work they put in is almost never seen, forgotten, and by almost all not even noticed. Which I think is a tragedy, as throughout all the games I have forgotten to experience that reference religion, this one is easily the most interesting of them. The subtlety of it is genuinely cathartic to tear apart and examine as someone who's interested in the franchise. And I think the best this video can do, and what my goal in the beginning was, is to shed light on some of the subjects and parallels in this game and spark a conversation about it, since it is again something that's deeply interesting about Silent Hill 2. Thanks again to Damien, the wonderful writer who helped with this script. This video would have been a lot less interesting to listen to without his help. If you would like to look at any of the sources, I have compiled them into a spreadsheet that I will put in the description. And lastly, if you have any thoughts, please drop them in the comments, as I would love to hear them.